After moving to London, I felt lonely and decided to try online dating. I wasn't very active and rarely received replies until I came across a profile of an extremely attractive woman named Effa. We shared similar tastes in music and movies, and she replied almost immediately. We messaged for about a week, and she told me she was originally from Belfast, had a young daughter, and had grown up during difficult times in Northern Ireland. Her story was detailed and compelling, which made it easy to trust her. Soon we began talking on the phone and occasionally on Skype, though she always avoided live video calls. She sent many photos of herself and her daughter, and everything initially seemed genuine. However, parts of her story didn't fully add up. She claimed to work as a stylist in central London, manage a well-known pub on weekends, and live in an expensive penthouse, things that felt unrealistic together. I also noticed inconsistencies in her photos, such as tattoos appearing and disappearing, which raised quiet doubts. When I finally asked her to meet in person, she cancelled at the last minute with an excuse involving her pub. Around the same time, I went on a date with someone else. Later, Aoife confronted me, insisting she knew exactly where I had been, who I was with, and what the woman looked like. She claimed someone connected to her pub had recognised me, even though this explanation didn't make much sense. The accuracy of her details was deeply unsettling. After an argument, we stopped speaking for a while. Eventually, she began calling late at night in a distressed state, describing episodes that sounded like sleep paralysis. I stayed on the phone to calm her, but by that point I no longer intended to meet or pursue any kind of relationship with her. After returning to London from a short trip to the US, my contact with Aoife had mostly faded. She had cancelled on me again, and I stopped expecting anything to come of it. Weeks later, while near King's Cross, she suddenly texted asking to meet. Since I was nearby and curious, I agreed. She told me to meet her at a pub in Camden, explaining she was finishing work and would join shortly. At the pub, I met her friend Rhys, a young Irish man, along with another friend. They seemed normal enough, and we spent hours drinking and talking while Aoife repeatedly delayed her arrival. Eventually, we moved to another pub she claimed to own. Although the place existed, she never appeared. Things became disturbing when another man, Pete, arrived and was introduced as someone there to meet Eva, who Rhys claimed was Aoife's best friend. As Pete and I talked, we realised Eva's story mirrored my experience almost exactly. Same background, same child's name, same excuses, and failed meetups. The similarities were too precise to ignore. We compared phones and discovered we both had the same contact number for what we were told were two different women. At that moment, Pete panicked and fled. I felt increasingly unsafe and left immediately. While heading to the underground, I noticed a man I'd seen earlier in the day watching me. When Rhys entered the same train carriage and appeared to acknowledge him, I exited suddenly and changed routes several times to be sure I wasn't followed. I reached a friend's home safely and avoided going home alone that night. Over the next few days, Aoife tried calling and texting, but I never responded. Eventually, all contact stopped. To this day, I don't know exactly what was happening, whether it was deception, manipulation, or something more coordinated. The experience taught me a hard lesson. When dating online, trust your instincts, prioritize safety, and don't let curiosity override caution. When I was 14, I lived in a quiet Midwestern suburb where I felt isolated, both because of my interests and because I had recently come out as gay to a few people, including my mother, who struggled to accept it. I didn't know anyone like me in real life, so the internet became my main way to connect with others who shared similar experiences. During the early days of dial-up and AOL chat, I began talking with a boy named Stephen, who said he was 16. We bonded over music, movies, and school, and he told me he had been forced to leave home because of his sexuality. After weeks of chatting, we decided to meet. I hid the truth from my parents and said he was a trusted mutual friend. He arrived one evening, seemed normal, and we spent the night driving around, eating out, and watching a movie. When he stayed over, nothing inappropriate happened. However, later that night, a police officer came to our door saying there had been a report that someone in the house had been communicating online with a dangerous individual. My internet access was restricted, though I denied knowing anything. The next day, while driving together, we were suddenly chased by another man. When we stopped, the man confronted me and revealed that Stephen was actually 21 and in a relationship with him. He threatened me and drove off with Stephen, leaving me shaken and confused. I returned home devastated and kept quiet about what happened. Soon after, my parents were contacted by the same man who informed them of Stephen's real identity. Federal investigators later confirmed that Stephen was using a false name and was wanted for serious crimes involving minors. I cooperated fully with the investigation and agreed to testify, though the case resulted in a very light sentence due to lack of other witnesses. A year later, I began receiving anonymous online messages containing threats and personal details, suggesting I was being watched. I reported everything to school officials and the police, and the messages eventually stopped. I never heard from Stephen again. I kept this experience private for many years. With counselling and time, I moved on, built a supportive life, and now live far away from that town. I remain cautious online, but I am safe and happy today. The day before the first text arrived, I had been at a festival and drank far more than I should have. I barely remembered the night, and only recalled getting home the next morning. Later that day, I woke up to a message from an unknown number asking who I was. Assuming I may have shared my number at the festival, I replied. The conversation seemed normal at first, though neither of us could remember meeting. He said his name was Jack, but it didn't ring any bells. As we kept talking, I felt uneasy. He asked my age and where I lived, then said he was 17 and lived nearby. Soon after, he asked if I was single, which made me uncomfortable, so I stopped replying. When I reread the messages later, I realized something disturbing. Months earlier, a friend had briefly used a co-worker's phone, also named Jack, to call me, and afterward that man had repeatedly messaged me until he claimed to delete my number. I contacted my friend and confirmed that Jack still worked with her. She told me he was actually a man in his late 50s and had been sending inappropriate messages to other young women as well. I told my mother, who contacted the police. A few days later, he texted again and sent a photo claiming it was him as a teenager, which I ignored. The police visited, but my phone had reset and deleted most of the earlier messages. However, he texted again while officers were present, confirming the situation. Although the police explained that my case alone didn't meet the legal threshold, reports from other women did. They later visited his workplace. My friend told me co-workers began avoiding him, and after police questioned him, it was discovered he had used a photo of his own son. He was eventually fired, relocated far away, and I gave a formal statement to support the case. Writing this now still unsettles me, but it also brings relief. What frightens me most is not knowing his true intentions. I can only hope this stopped him from targeting anyone else. I am nearly 28 and grew up in the Appalachian region of the United States. Mentioning that I am gay is important to this story, as it explains many of the poor decisions I made as a teenager. When I was 16, my life outwardly seemed stable. I had friends and did fine at school, but at home things were very different. My parents, influenced by strict religious beliefs, struggled deeply with my identity. Although they later grew and expressed regret, at the time I was only allowed to stay at home part-time and spent months sleeping on friends' couches. During that period, I fell into a severe depression. The year before, I had survived a serious medical crisis, and exactly 1 year later, the first person I ever loved died in a car accident. My grief was dismissed at home, which left me feeling completely alone. I turned to unhealthy coping behaviors just to avoid feeling the emotional pain. Despite having caring friends, I believed I was unlovable and would always be alone. In that mindset, I decided the only way to find acceptance was online. I created a MySpace profile that reflected my dark emotions and began reaching out to other gay teens. One profile immediately caught my attention, a boy named Jacob from Maryland. I messaged him without expecting a reply, but he responded almost instantly. That small interaction gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. We talked constantly, bonding over our shared desire to escape our hometowns and start new lives. Within a week, We began an online relationship, and he introduced me to his circle of friends, including his ex-boyfriend Zachary and a close friend named Josie. I quickly became especially close with Josie, who I spoke to daily and trusted deeply. As I spent more time with this group, I learned they had a rough reputation, though I initially brushed it off. While Jacob and I were doing well, I found myself increasingly drawn to Zachary, who was kind and gentle, very different from Jacob's more intense personality. That emotional conflict marked the beginning of a much darker chapter still to come. Zachary was a musician, and the first time I heard him play piano, I was completely drawn to him. As I spent more time talking with him online, my connection with Jacob faded. Eventually, Jacob realized what was happening and, to my surprise, initially said he was fine with it. After about 2 months, I began dating Zachary, a relationship that would last 2 years and coincide with some of the most difficult periods of my life. Josie was happy for us, and we remained very close. However, once Zachary and I started dating, Jacob's behavior changed dramatically. Despite claiming he was okay, he became volatile and obsessive. On multiple occasions, he would act irrationally when intoxicated, creating dangerous situations involving Zachary. Each time, others in his circle would intervene, and afterward Jacob would apologize, only for the cycle to repeat. Over time, this constant instability became emotionally exhausting, yet it slowly felt normal, and I failed to recognize just how serious it was. About a year after I first met Jacob online, I was still with Zachary and remained close to Josie, whom I had met in person by then. Despite ongoing chaos, I felt oddly accomplished for my age and believed I had built a new sense of belonging. During this time, I also became involved with an alternative spiritual group in my hometown, largely as a reaction to being rejected at home. One night, Josie called me in a panic, something completely unlike her. She told me Jacob had gone far beyond his previous behavior and had allegedly involved another person in plans to seriously harm me and my family. Hearing that my younger sister could be at risk shattered me. No matter how strained things were with my parents, protecting my family, especially my sister, became my only focus. Josie believed this person was already traveling toward my home, which left me with only hours to react. I reached out to someone I trusted nearby for help and prepared myself to stay alert and protect my household. What followed was one of the most terrifying nights of my life, and it marked the moment I finally understood the true danger I had been ignoring for far too long. I hid behind a massive oak tree, slim enough to disappear completely if I stayed still. I waited in silence, hoping my instincts were right. When a car stopped on the opposite side of the tree, I heard the door open and the unmistakable sound of a handgun being prepared. Instead of fear, I felt a surge of anger. I responded by stepping out and making it clear I was not defenseless. From about 10 feet away, I confronted him and calmly told him he had a choice: leave immediately and return to where he came from, or face serious consequences if he made a single wrong move. After a tense pause, he backed away, got into his car, and drove off. That night changed something in me. I decided I could no longer avoid the situation. I needed to confront Jacob directly. I contacted him online and made it clear his plan had failed, and that I was not the powerless person he thought I was. Instead of remorse, he mocked me, dismissed my anger, and made cruel, disturbing remarks, revealing how deeply obsessed he still was with my boyfriend Zachary. He claimed this was only the beginning and promised he would try to take Zachary back at any cost. Furious and shaken, I told him to watch himself and then contacted Josie, who agreed to let me stay with her in Maryland for a week. Zachary, unaware of everything that had happened, was outraged when he found out. Friends on his side began discussing plans to confront Jacob, but before anything could happen, Jacob was warned and fled. His attempt to reach Zachary failed, as Zachary had already left to stay safely with his mother in New York. When I arrived in Maryland, I was relieved to learn Zachary was out of danger. Even though I was disappointed, we still couldn't see each other. I spent the week with Josie, trying to regain some sense of normalcy while staying alert. One outing led to an unsettling conversation with someone connected to Jacob, who bluntly admitted how serious the danger had been. Rather than escalate things further, I chose to remain calm and strategic. After the visit, life briefly settled into a rare period of peace. Jacob disappeared completely, and the start of my second year with Zachary felt unexpectedly hopeful. My birthday month passed without incident. But that calm didn't last. In early February, Josie urgently needed to leave her home, and I agreed to help. After a long drive, we stayed in a motel for nearly 2 weeks before my parents allowed her to move in. Around this time, Zachary's health took a devastating turn. He had been living with cystic fibrosis, but his condition worsened rapidly, and he was hospitalized and moved urgently up the transplant list. What followed would reshape everything I thought I knew about my future. After everything we had been through, all I wanted was to be by Zachary's side. Unfortunately, he was hospitalized far away at a medical center specializing in cystic fibrosis, and traveling there wasn't possible for me. Josie tried to keep my spirits up, drawing from her own painful experience of losing her sister to the same illness. She reassured me that because Zachary was young and took good care of himself, he would likely receive a transplant soon. I tried to believe her, but the fear of losing him never left me. Zachary and I spoke whenever he had the strength. Despite being scared and alone, he told me my support gave him comfort, and knowing that helped me cope until everything collapsed. On February 14, 2008, Zachary passed away unexpectedly due to complications with his lungs. I was completely shattered. Josie told me the news, and I broke down entirely. Valentine's Day has never been the same since. It became a symbol of loss rather than love. About a month later, I was spiraling, numbing myself and ignoring the warning signs around me. On St. Patrick's Day, Josie called me and said something that stopped me cold. She claimed Zachary wasn't actually gone, and that everything had been staged to protect him. Then, shockingly, I heard his voice on the phone. My mind couldn't process it. What followed was a complete emotional collapse, fueled by confusion, grief, and poor decisions. That night ended in disaster. I lost my job, made reckless choices, and was eventually arrested for driving under the influence after a serious crash. Though I avoided the worst legal outcome, the consequences followed me for years and became a turning point in my life. I realized I had reached the end of what I could endure. I finally distanced myself from everyone connected to Maryland and began listening to longtime friends who had warned me all along. When they pointed out inconsistencies in the stories I had been told, I reluctantly started looking deeper. What I uncovered was devastating. Dozens of fake online accounts, all connected to Josie's emails, using different names, photos, and identities, including Zachary, Jacob, and others. In that moment, the truth finally became clear. The people I had feared, loved, and mourned were fabrications. Years of manipulation, confusion, and pain traced back to a single source. The realization hit me all at once, and without my friends there to ground me, I don't know how I would have survived it. I slowly realized that what I believed were real people had never existed at all. Every identity, every interaction, had been carefully manufactured. I gathered links to all the accounts connected to her and confronted her directly. When I showed her the evidence, the silence on the line said everything. Eventually, she admitted it and even laughed, as if it was some elaborate joke. In that moment, the reality finally hit me. The deception was over. I later understood that I had been the target of long-term online manipulation before there was even language for it. I had shared my life, my home, and years of trust with the very person who had been orchestrating the chaos. The scale of it was staggering. Countless messages, hours of calls, thousands of dollars spent traveling, and even unexplained financial losses. None of the people I feared, loved, or relied on were real. There was no group, no rivals, only one individual creating dozens of identities and directing everything behind the scenes. As the truth settled in, the emotional damage became unavoidable. I withdrew from social media, limited my connections, and struggled to trust anyone again. The betrayal left me disoriented and deeply shaken, especially realizing that the person I had believed I loved was not who I thought they were. For a long time, I coped poorly and felt completely unmoored. Years later, we crossed paths again, and I chose to meet her, not out of forgiveness for her sake, but for my own closure. I asked for honesty, and she offered an explanation, though I still question how much of it was true. She claimed it began as a misguided joke in her teenage years, creating fake profiles to deceive someone else online. Over time, she built nearly 20 identities using random images and fabricated histories. When she met me, she said it escalated beyond her control. Some details were real. The music she shared was genuinely hers, and she was a talented musician. Other parts were staged with help from acquaintances. Many elements, however, were simply inventions meant to deepen my emotional attachment. After hours of listening, I had heard enough. My life and family had been placed at risk and my emotional health permanently altered, all because of manipulation driven by a need for attention. Today, more than a decade later, I live alone but at peace. What I lost can never be recovered, but what I gained, self-respect, strength and self-understanding, can never be taken from me. I no longer define myself by relationships. I learned to value myself, to stand on my own, and to accept that surviving something like this permanently changes how you trust, but it also proves how resilient you truly are.